Hi and welcome to the Spooky Isles. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're going to be talking to Spooky Isles Irish editor Ann Massey. How are you, Ann?
I'm doing well, David. Thanks very much.
How are you faring in the lockdown at the moment?
Well, I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a very, very small town, and I look out my window over farmers' fields and mountains, so it's not as impacting, I think, as if you were in a big city.
Okay, what county are you in? You're in Limerick, aren't you?
County Limerick, yeah.
Okay, very nice. And so, as I said, Ann's been one of our longer contributors. You've actually you're Irish, but you're basically Irish, but you were born in England and you grew up in England, but you've basically spent most of your life in Ireland. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. Every holiday, anything you can imagine, we were back here, and I've been living here full time now for the last 15 years.
Okay. Now, what we want to talk to you today about is one of your favourite subjects is the Irish witch trials, if that can be a favourite subject. But now you wrote about it in your book, Dark Emerald Tales. Now, Dark Emerald Tales is also the name of your blog. Can you tell us a little bit about, were the Irish witch trials any different than, say, anywhere else in the world? Say, like here in England or in the American Salem witch trials?
Well, they started a lot earlier here than you would think, long before Salem. Our first witch trial, in fact, was in 1324. Came off the back of a papal decree that granted sweeping powers, if you like, to men across Europe, and obviously including Ireland, to interrogate, demand answers, and make accusations against anybody, from someone that would be providing herbal cures right through to someone that seemed to have an unusual amount of luck. What you have in Ireland is, obviously, we were a pagan nation for many centuries, and even during the conversion to Christianity, it was a case of those that were coming in to try and persuade people to turn to Christianity were using, instead of turning people away from pagan rituals and rites and the gods that they were worshipping, they were actually intertwining the pagan elements with the Christian teachings. So people were being enticed rather than coerced into Christianity. However, at the bottom of all of it was fear. Fear during paganism, fear even during Christianity. So the rites and rituals that people had known for generations and generations continued to carry forward. And the church basically felt that was the grip they couldn't quite get on the Irish population.
Okay, so you're saying this happened in the 1300s. What did those? So when you say the witch trial, what did that entail back then? Were they as vicious as what we would imagine they are in sort of popular culture?
To a degree, it depended on who the accusation was directed at. The first witch trial, people tend to think of it as Alice Kyteler, who was a businesswoman from County Kilkenny. But it was actually her maid, Petronella de Meath, that was the first convicted witch in Ireland and the first burned at the stake. What had happened was Alice was a publican. Her place, Kytler's, is still in the centre of Kilkenny. You can go there, you can visit it, you can see the stories. It's a fantastic place to go. But she was essentially a femme fatale. She would target wealthy men. She would persuade them through vicarious means to sign over any wealth they had, any property, money, and she would take ownership of it. And these men would befall unusual deaths, early deaths, and a lot of them would be poison based. dropping out of hair, of nails, what you see with slow arsenic poisoning, those kind of things. And what happened is Kilkenny's actually, it's Ireland's smallest city. So you can imagine back in 1324 that the population was very small, and these men would be in her premises. She would have luscious serving women. These men would be bestowing gifts, and she obviously earned herself a reputation. Those in authority were afraid of her because she wielded power, and the women of Kilkenny envious and didn't like the fact that their men were going there for attention. And as a result, she finally got accused by the Bishop of Ossory. Ossory is actually Kilkenny and the surrounding areas. And she was accused because the family of one of her husbands, who realised they had no estate to inherit, went to him. And she was so powerful and she had so many friends in authority that she actually managed to put her trial off by having the Bishop of Ossory jailed himself. So, you know, this woman knew what she was doing. And eventually it got to a stage where both her maid and her own son, William Outlaw Jr., had their convictions first. William, being a man, and because he kind of confessed really fast, his penance, if you like, for being accused of sorcery, and cavorting with the devil and whatever, he had to attend mass and feed the poor. Petronella de Meath, who was the maidservant of Alice, wouldn't say anything about her employer. She was obviously starstruck with the status of Alice and everything else, and had a certain commitment. And she was tortured literally to within an inch of her life before she was burned at the stake. So Alice's trial continued soon after that. But because Alice was powerful, she managed to get away using the people she knew, probably into Europe. Nobody knows exactly where she went. And she was actually convicted in absentia of witchcraft, but was never executed. And her ghost is still said to reside over Kyteler's Inn, protecting her business that brought her so much wealth.
And you've been there? You've been to this inn?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a really quirky, funky building. It's over several floors. It's got stained glass windows. It's a really eerie but cool place to visit.
Okay. Was there any evidence to suggest they were devil-worshipping witches?
There was some. They had her, when, you know, if you like the term, raided the premises. There was evidence of, like, that she'd been sacrificing animals. You know, bones were there, stuff that you'd associate with the occult. How much she used it for fear and how much was genuine, we just don't know. The accusations against her were basically everything from having sexual relations with a demon to controlling the people in the community and poisoning and murdering her husbands. So she had a lot piled against her, but still managed to get away.
Okay. Well, she was the first, but she certainly wasn't the last person accused of witchcraft in Ireland. Can you tell us a bit more about some other cases that sort of, you know, give us an overview of what was going on at the time?
Well, funnily enough, there was quite a big gap then. If you think that was 1325, her in absentia conviction took place. The next one was actually Florence Newton in 1660. She was in County Cork, Youghal, sea town, if you like. She was a strange one in that her accuser was a maidservant of a wealthy house. What happened is one particular winter, it's in 1660, Florence Newton had called to a house and said, I think it was the equivalent, we call it Stephen's Day here, Boxing Day in the UK. They had actually, you know, there'd be leftovers, there'd be scraps. That's what Boxing Day was traditionally for in the UK as well. And the maidservant refused, chased her away. And she saw the maidservant in the street, gave her what was described in the transcripts of the trial, a vicious kiss. And from that moment on, the maidservant was apparently vomiting up nails. There was poltergeist activity in the house. She was, in her transcripts, had accused Florence Newton of astrally projecting and sticking pins in her. It went to trial. She was then accused further of also causing the death of her jailers, or one in particular where she kissed his hand and he dropped dead. All the transcripts from the middle of the trial onwards, despite the ones before being meticulously kept, disappeared. So she is still down as an alleged witch, although consensus is that she was found guilty and hanged.
Okay, but we can't prove that though. Just
We
that's what
can't prove that, no.
Okay.
On a completely different element, and this is the thing about Irish witches, there are no two that are similar. There are no two that have similar stories, similar backgrounds. In Dublin, we had Darkey Kelly. She ran a brothel, basically. Ladies of the night often frequented. She was accused quite regularly of using dark magic to entice men to her brothel. She took up relations with Simon Luttrell, who was a very powerful figure in Dublin and also a very powerful member of the Hellfire Club. And they had a big falling out. It became he said, she said. She was accusing him of sacrificing a baby that they had had. He then in turn accused her of witchcraft. Because of his powers, she was raided and they discovered not evidence of witchcraft per se, but bodies in her cellar of men that had been robbed. And she was convicted of witchcraft and became Ireland's first documented serial killer. Okay. And she was hanged from the gallows in Dublin, and her ladies of the night cut her down, brought her back to the brothel and waked her for 24 hours.
Okay. So why was she charged with witchcraft? Surely murder would have got her the hangman's noose anyway. Why go that far?
Simon Luttrell had it in for her big time. He was such a powerful figure in Dublin. He had every judge, every authority figure was in his pocket. The Hellfire Club was at its peak on Montpelier Hill in Dublin, and her dragging his name through the mud did not sit well, and he was not going to let it go unpunished. He wanted her to suffer, and murder, she could have been charged, she might not have been convicted because she still had powerful friends of her own. But for calling witchcraft and with the dead bodies, he was assured that she would die a horrible death, and that was his plan.
So why are there such big jumps, Anne? Why are we're only seeing one or two? Were there other ones that were just a bit smaller that are just not very significant?
I'll tell you what it was, David. It's the fact that these women held extreme power and were a threat to the authorities. They were a threat to the church. They were a threat to the judicial system. What people don't realise is that the church actually turned a blind eye to a lot of if you like, lesser infractions in relation to the laws set by the Vatican. You know, people that were using herbs, people that were using small remedies, doing a bit of fortune telling. Generally, they turned a blind eye to it. It was only when there was somebody that was a threat to their power would they step in and these charges would take place.
Okay. How does it compare with the witch trials in England?
I think they were more personal. I think in England it was more of a lynch mob mentality. Here it would be an individual that had it out for somebody, and it would become very personal and it would become very vindictive rather than the whole lynch mob mentality. These women, you know, and I can go on and mention the likes of Biddy Early and the Island McGee witches. These were people that were targeted because they had control over the local community. And that's the difference, I think. Whereas in the UK, I think it was very much more, it was a proper witch hunt. It was lynch mob driven through fear. There probably was the power element, but it was more generic. I think here there would be an individual behind each accusation and subsequent conviction.
Okay, you mentioned a couple of names there just before, but I just think we'll jump to the last sort of, you know, I wouldn't say murder of a witch. Can you tell us a bit about Bridget Cleary? That's an interesting story.
Bridget Cleary was, again, and this is where there is one thing in common with all the women, is that they were independent and successful. Bridget Cleary was, by all accounts, a stunning looking woman. She married a local man in Tipperary, and she still maintained her own business. She had hens, she sold eggs at market, she was a seamstress, and community whispers were going around. She was too good for him. What was she doing with him? And Michael Cleary started listening to these accusations and look at his wife in a different light. And he then sought the input of his family, his cousins, his own father, and they declared her that she was either a witch or what we call a changeling, which is where a fairy being is brought forward and switched in place for the human. And they would walk and talk like the person they'd replaced, but there would be certain aspects and elements that would highlight that they were an ethereal entity. Then Bridget actually became ill, whether she had a touch of bronchitis or something along those lines. She had a bit of a fever, and they decided they would view that as another sign that she was either a fairy or a witch. And they called in the local doctor, and the doctor said she would recover, but she needed time. But she would be okay. She wasn't at death's door. They then called in the local priest, and he said, look, she's not dying. She doesn't need the last rites. I will do them, but she doesn't need them. She'll be fine. But by now hysteria had set in. It was a very small village, very small area, and it just shows the power of fear. And they actually took this woman from her bed, and one of the signs to check were they a supernatural being was holding them over a fire. And they basically burned this woman alive and then buried her in a shallow grave, which was found. And her husband was actually put on trial for murder. And the reason that happened was because this happened as recently as March of 1895. So just coming into the 1900s, the fear, the spread of gossip, the pagan traditions that had stemmed all the way through were still there, But this time, the courts saw sense. Convictions were had for murder and accessory. But do you know, you'd wonder if even today that element still isn't there.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't, as you say, it's within 10 years of my grandparents being born in Ireland. It's not, it's within people's memories.
Exactly.
So it just seems like, well, I don't know, sort of some kind of mass idiocy that just went too far. Or they were using it for other reasons that had nothing to do with, witchcraft, really, which all seem like that, don't they? They just used it to execute someone.
Yeah, I think, you know, I wouldn't be the first to jump on the feminism bandwagon, but all of these cases, the common denominator was a man and a loss of power. And if you think about the times that it happened through, from the 1300s through to the start of the 1900s, you know, men were still elevated. They were the judges, they were the law, they were the clergy, they were the doctors. And I think most of it was a fear, not so much of the supernatural, but a fear of a loss of power. And I think they would go to any lengths to retain that power, whether it be Bridget Cleary's husband and he's standing in the community.
What happened to him, by the way? What happened to?
He was convicted and he served his sentence.
So he just served he didn't get hanged, though. Would you not got hanged in those days?
It was too late on then. That those kind of hangings just weren't happening for that kind of thing. That it was jail.
Bizarre. Anyway, I mean, I'm certainly not in favour of hangings, but I would have thought in the late 1800s they were still hanging people. But who knows? Anyway, thank you for that, Anne. I mean, we don't have a lot of time today, so obviously we'll talk about some other aspects of witchcraft in Ireland maybe another day, and talk about some other things that are in your book. People, if they just remember, it's Dark Emerald Tales. I'll put a link into how people can get their own copy on Amazon. What are you doing to keep yourself busy during this coronavirus pandemic lock-in?
Writing, and more writing, and a lot of research, actually, because the one thing it has done, I don't know about anybody else, but here in Ireland, we're only allowed out on essential journeys. And for exercise purposes, it's within 2 kilometres of our home. Okay. And what I've been doing is discovering more about our old graveyards in the town, abandoned properties, that sort of thing. So I'm doing a lot more local research on stuff, because I'll be off gallivanting around the rest of Ireland. You don't spend as much time on your own doorstep. So some interesting things, and hopefully some good write-ups come into Spooky Owls regarding more local.
Well, we look forward to some hauntings of Limerick and your town. So thanks very much for that, Anne. People, if they can remember, I hope I'm pointing in the right direction down here, down the bottom here. People subscribe to the Spooky Owls YouTube channel, and of course check out Ann Massey's articles on Spooky Owls. You take care, and we'll talk soon.
Take care. Thanks.